Thanks, Jamie. All right, so a little bit about our mission. So our goal is to provide a place for Agile enthusiasts to learn, grow, and flourish, and apply not only Scrum, but apply Agile in the world where we work. And we think that there's great value in getting outside of our individual silos and connecting with others who are passionate about growing as Agile practitioners. So that's Jamie came up with that for our mission. I think that's really nice. So here's our leadership team. Jamie Kriegel, she's the founder and started this whole thing in motion. And then Katrin and I, we pitch in where we can to help. So Jamie's living the dream. All right. So here's some ways to connect with us. We don't have all the socials covered, but we are on LinkedIn, Facebook, Meetup, and YouTube. And invariably somebody always asks, are you going to be recording this? Barry has given us permission to record. So Jamie will post that on our YouTube link there. If you see it, you'll be able to get access to that the next day or so, however long it takes to process. But yep, you can meet with us there. All right, February is going to be a busy month. So we've got several additional wonderful world-class speakers that we have listed. You see Patrick Adams there, Chris Lee, Richard Lawrence, and Richard Kasparowski that are coming. Those are all on our Meetup page, so go there for more information. If you want to register for those, we'd love to see you. And a bit about our sponsors. So Agile Alliance, Agile.ai, and Scrum.org. They provide us with the funds to be able to continue doing this. So being able to have a LinkedIn, not a LinkedIn, but have a Meetup account, and being able to have a Zoom account where we can have these members, they are the ones who enable us to do that. And I'll just say that this group, we don't just, while we take anybody's money to help us, Katrin and Jamie and I, we really believe that this is a great group of sponsors and they all have a lot to offer. And we're both involved in all three of them. So please go out and check them out if you haven't already. Can't say enough about our sponsors. They really help us out a lot. Okay, so now for the meat of our meeting here. We're very honored to have Barry Overeem, and he's going to talk to us about unleashing Scrum in our organizations. Barry is co-founder of the Liberators. And Barry, I'm going to turn it over to you. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. And I already just shared the link to the Google presentation that I'll use today. I am going to share my screen in a moment. I think you should stop sharing first, Mark. Is that correct? Yeah.
There you go.
Let's share my screen. Slideshow. And let the show begin. Well, it's not really a show that I have in mind, but the purpose of the session is to have a bit of fun and see if we can, well, use the wisdom of everyone that is in this session to learn a bit more about Scrum, maybe a bit about Zombie Scrum, etc. Maybe a tiny bit about Liberating Structure. Let's just see what happens. I have a certain flow in mind, but I'm quite flexible to just discuss topics that might emerge during this session. I will take a 1 hour time slot in account. So after strictly 1 hour, that means 55 minutes from now, we'll do some polite waving, and that's the moment where you can leave. I don't really, it's 6 o'clock in the evening over here. Already told my wife and kids that I was going to do this, and I don't have any other plans this evening. So if you still want to hang around for another 15 or 20 minutes after the 1 hour time slot, then that's perfectly fine by me. This is also a way to take away the pressure of me to stick within 1 hour. Roughly, this is, well, I say our journey, our Scrum journey in a nutshell, because it's not only about me. What is about me is that I think at the start of this millennial, I started to work in IT environments. Someone as an application manager, project manager, that was my background. Did that for about roughly 10 years. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I discovered Scrum, mostly because the software development projects I was part of was not really a huge success. So I was looking for different ways of doing product development, ended up trying Scrum, called myself a Scrum Master. Somewhere along the road, met Johannes Schartau. He's our friend from Germany, the most funny German I know. Along the way, I also became a Scrum.org trainer in 2015. 4 years ago, I started the Liberators together with Christian Verwijs, my colleague. Together, we developed the professional Scrum Master 2 class of Scrum.org. We started experimenting with Liberating Structures. Chris built the Zombie Scrum survey. That was the first version of the survey that we developed a couple of years ago. We noticed that it made sense to connect Scrum with Liberating Structures. So we started doing that, wrote a lot of articles about it, started organizing meetups and immersion workshops. Then we came to the idea that maybe we could connect all our learnings into a book. And together with Johannes, we wrote the Zombie Scrum Survival Guide, which was published 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, something like that. Chris is a scientist, that's his background. So he decided to use Corona as a great excuse to start doing some more science. And he worked together with a scientist from the University of Copenhagen. And he wrote the paper, A Theory on Scrum Team Effectiveness. I can talk a bit more about that later. And right now, our core focus is developing the Scrum Team Survey. So we made the switch from, towards becoming a product development company and growing a community around it that hopefully sees value in the product. So this is, I'm not sure if it was 1 minute, but I'm just going to call it a 1-minute pitch of my background and also Chris's background and a bit of Johannes. I'll touch on some of these topics in more detail during this session, but let's start with the first topic first. Let's start with this one, and that's Zombie Scrum. Because this is the book that we wrote. I'm supposed to be the left guy, the guy on the left, although due to Corona, my hair is a bit longer these days. Chris is the person in the middle, and Johannes is the guy with the red beard, the pirate, on the right side. So it's the three of us. And as you see, we don't like to take stuff too seriously. But let's start with this one first. So symptoms of Zombie Scrum. And we're not going to do any breakout room sessions. So if you're scared of that, you don't have to leave the session right now. But I would like to see if we can make it a bit more interactive, because I could explain the Zombie Scrum symptoms up front, but I can also give you about 10 or 20 seconds to just study this illustration. And if you think that you've spotted a symptom of Zombie Scrum, then write it down in the chat. And with 73 participants, I would be highly disappointed if we don't capture them all. So take some time, 10, 20 seconds to study the symptoms of Zombie Scrum that are illustrated over here. And if you found one, write it down in the chat. No sprint goal, disengaged, forgot to invite stakeholders, complacent devs. Yeah, nothing done. Yeah, excellent. Co-located but no chat. That's a good one. I didn't even spot that one, but it's a very good one. No visibility of retro actions. They seem to get forgotten. No collaboration. Let's see, did we already got all of them? Yeah. Retrospective of SpiderNet. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. I think you've covered all of them. Yeah. So one way to explain Zombie Scrum is something that looks like Scrum from a distance. You might think that if you are looking at a Scrum team from a distance, you might think, hey, that's a Scrum team doing Scrum over there. But on closer inspection, it's quite shocking to see that it's not really Scrum at all. Some things are missing that are quite important. One of the things is they don't have any sprint goal. Probably they also don't have any product goals, so they don't really have a clear purpose on what they are doing. There's no continuous improvement loop going on. So the retrospective, yeah, they are doing these retrospectives, but instead of inspection and adaptation, it's mostly inspect and ignore, and then move on again. They don't really have a clue who their stakeholders are, or if they think that they have stakeholders, then, well, in reality, it's more like audience making a lot of noise, but those are not the people that have a stake in your products. They are not able to ship fast, so they can't really validate any assumptions that they might have about their improvements. And they're just going through the motions of Scrum, but they lack the beating heart of Scrum. And if I say the beating heart of Scrum, what am I talking about? Again, just if you have an idea, put it in the chat. What's the beating heart of Scrum? Not sprint, yeah. Inspect and adapt. What's the one thing that Scrum should result in? No? Yes, done. Mark, excellent. The increment, Avnish, excellent. Yeah, so done software, something valuable that you can put in the hand of your stakeholders. But that's lacking. That's what we call the beating heart of Scrum. There are lots of reasons why a Scrum team might end up with Zombie Scrum. I'm going to mention, I think, about 5 of them. And I'm just going to do it quite short. So I'm just going to explain them in maybe about 30 seconds. You will have time to ask questions, and then based on your questions, we can dig in more detail to the topics that you find most relevant. One cause of Zombie Scrum is that business and IT are separated. And I've worked at a client in the Netherlands that literally had 2 buildings. In one building, all the business people were there. And business people, already the term is so abstract that it's, well, can't be very good. But the business people are in one building, and then the IT department, the developers, the development teams were in the other building. And then the business, those were the people talking to their customers and the stakeholders. They would write down the requirements, set up a contract, allocate budget, etc. They would hand it over to the IT departments, and then the IT department should only build the products. And this was sort of like the progress or the flow that was going on in this organization. So there was no close collaboration between business and IT. One cause of Zombie Scrum. Another cause is they don't really understand why they are doing Scrum. So maybe they were pictured some kind of doomsday scenario that they really should start doing Scrum, otherwise they wouldn't survive as a company. Maybe someone hired an Agile coach and their Agile coach told them that they should be doing Scrum. Could be that a manager wanted to do Scrum in his or her organization because that manager noticed that all the other managers in their organization were also doing Scrum, and you can't stay behind, right? Or someone read a book in which certain promises were made about, well, exploding productivity, and who doesn't want that? So that's the reason why they ended up doing Scrum. But these are not really good reasons to start using Scrum. This is not really like intrinsic motivation. So that's another cause. The third one is more output focused. So they use Scrum, but the only thing that they measure is stuff like the velocity of the team, daily stand-up duration, the maturity of the Scrum teams. Well, it's all output instead of outcome, and outcome is more like value focused. But it's more difficult to measure, of course. It's not impossible, but that's also something that we can talk about later. Another cause is maybe your organization started a big bang agile transformation. They sent everyone to expensive Scrum trainings, Scrum Alliance trainings, Scrum.org trainings, Scrum.inc trainings, that doesn't really matter. And those trainings, I'm a Scrum.org trainer myself as well. It's not wrong if you send people to a training, but it should not be the only thing that you are doing. If you're only sending people to a training and not explaining why they're doing Scrum in the organization, or you are not changing the organization as a whole, but just giving everyone a certificate, well, a certificate is not magically going to change your organization. There's more work that needs to be done in your organization. And I think this is the final one that I want to draw attention to. It's one that we see quite often, in a way that if you just implement best practices that work at other organizations, then probably somehow you will end up as an agile organization. I think the Spotify model is probably the most famous template or practice that a lot of organizations tried, or just implement SAFe, and then SAFe will make you agile. And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with SAFe, well, maybe, or with Spotify, but it's not about the framework itself. But organizations are complex, and within complexity, well, you need to a one-stop solution that is going to be your solution. So you should figure out each organization should figure out for themselves what works in their context, given the complexity that they are facing. So in that sense, best practices might be useful, but it's not a guarantee that they are going to work in your environment, in your organization. This is not the ultimate list of causes of zombie scrum, but if I had to pick 5, then probably these would be my top 5. So what I've done so far is I gave you a short explanation of what Zombie Scrum is about, and I shared a bunch of symptoms that we see happening a lot in causes. The question for you is, what are the symptoms and causes of Zombie Scrum that you recognize? So given the symptoms and causes that I explained, let's just see if we can notice a pattern in the chat of all the symptoms and causes that you recognize. Just write them down shortly. I'll give you about 10, 15 seconds for that one. And then I can finish my coffee. Feature factory, yeah. Lack of engagement. No product owner. Yeah, just going through the motions of the events because the Scrum Guide says so. Yeah, I'm quite allergic to that response. Okay, yeah. Now there's one more question left, and that's this one. Now, given what I've been talking about so far, what questions, thoughts, or concerns do you have about preventing or fixing zombie scrum? Could also frame this one a bit more simple, and that's just, what is a big question that you still have about zombie scrum, or scrum in general? That's fine as well. But what are the questions that you would like to have addressed for the remainder of this session? And it's not going to be a guarantee that I can answer all questions, but let's see how far we can get. And in complexity, there are no experts. Expertise is way more important. So let's just work together and share our expertise to answer the questions that you have. So if you have a question, just put it in the chat. Interesting questions. Cool. I think there are enough questions just to get started. What I'll do, the Google presentation that I've shared contains quite a lot of slides. I'm not going to talk about each of these slides individually. I'm just going to use illustrations that I might connect to the question that you've asked to explain or answer the question. For the illustration that I haven't covered, just after this meetup, take some time for yourself to just check out the illustrations. And I'm pretty sure that you can make up the story behind it yourself. I do like the question. The question mark was missing, but I think it's a question by Heath, and he said where to start. Well, I think that's a good starting question as well. My recommendation would be, let's see if we can find it. Start with this topic or this comic, because it says on top, ship it fast, but it actually explains what Scrum is all about. And let's just read it together. This makes sense of it together. In complex work, more is unknown than known. And the unknown is discovered by releasing done increments early and often. And with these increments, we validate assumptions and we learn what is needed and avoid the risk of spending time and money on the wrong things. As a result, we can deliver more value to our stakeholders sooner. For me, this comic is the essence of what Scrum is about. And you might notice one thing, it doesn't mention Scrum at all. It doesn't use any Scrum terminology. It doesn't use any complex, well, it does use the word complex, but just a very simple way of explaining what the why behind Scrum is. And my recommendation is, if you start with a team or if you start with an organization, just draw attention to this, because this is in a nutshell what it is all about. Once everyone has a shared understanding about the purpose of Scrum, then you can take a look about how the Scrum framework itself uses the events, the artifacts, and the roles to implement this purpose of Scrum. But for me, in a nutshell, this is a good starting point to just create shared understanding about the purpose of Scrum. Let's just see. Is a Scrum Master accountable for the success of the team? If you like, Ankush, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Can you elaborate on your question? Maybe you can unmute yourself and just ask the question, add a bit more detail.
Sure. So basically, hello everyone. So this is the question I asked because in India, typically in service industry, Scrum Master is understood accountable for the delivery of the team and, ensuring that, team is successful, in delivering the product or services. So that's why I thought, to check on that, how it should be.
That's a very good question. It's recorded, this session, so you need to pay attention to my words. If you say the delivery of the team, that's an interesting one. Okay? A Scrum Master is accountable for the success of Scrum in an organization. And part of Scrum is, of course, the delivery. But the way I more would like to explain it is developers, the product owner, and a Scrum Master all have a specific accountability. And I would say the success of the team, in a way, the Scrum Master is accountable for that, but a team can only be successful if they are busy with product development, if they also ship product frequently, and if they have the desired quality. Well, I would say product delivery is something that's more on the plate of the product owner, and that it lives up to the standards, the quality standards. That's something that I expect from the developers. So it's a shared responsibility in a sense. And I think the discussion between responsibility and accountability is a bit vague and theoretical. I would say, but that's a shared responsibility. But to make Scrum work in an organization, that's the accountability of a Scrum Master. Is that helpful, Ankush? Is that an answer to your question?
Oh yes, it does, and that's the thought I had, and that's where I'm working with our leadership to think in those directions, and to move towards that. But
yeah, that's an interesting question. So, what is another question that someone has? Just unmute yourself and maybe just ask the question.
I just wanted to follow up on what you just said. So if the Scrum Master is responsible for making Scrum work, I hope I didn't misquote you there.
No, that's fine, yeah.
How do we know when Scrum is working? Isn't it about the delivery of quality products?
That's a good one. Well, I'm just gonna take the freedom to and that's why that's the advantage of not really having a strict flow of my presentation. So I'm going to talk for about 5 to 10 minutes about some of the things that Chris has been doing. And I'm going to talk on behalf of Christian. I'm not a scientist, so I'll try to explain it in the ways that I understand it. What Chris has been doing is he wrote an academic paper, A Theory in Scrum Team Effectiveness. If you would check out that link, then you can find the paper. I've also learned that it takes quite a lot of time to get your paper peer reviewed. So it's already in peer review for, I think, about a year, and probably it will take another 6 months to really get it fully approved as an academic paper. Chris also wrote a non-technical blog post, and that's the second link, what makes Scrum teams effective. The essence of the paper is this model. And let's see if I can answer your question by explaining this model. You can read it best from right to left. And the end goal should, for a team or an organization that uses Scrum, is to focus on team effectiveness. And we describe team effectiveness in a very simple way. An effective team has happy team members and happy stakeholders. That's just a very simplistic way of explaining what team effectiveness is about. Happy team members, happy stakeholders. Now, in order to get to team effectiveness, to the highest score of team effectiveness, stakeholder concern and responsiveness, those are the, well, I would say, two primary topics. Stakeholder concern means a shared product ownership between the stakeholders and the Scrum team or the Scrum teams. Meaning it's not only the product owner that understands what the product is about and when you deliver value. Everyone has a shared understanding about the product vision, the roadmap, the product goals, the sprint goals, and the work that they are doing. They also are highly engaged with their stakeholders. So they know who their stakeholders are. The stakeholders are not people with an opinion about the product, but people that really have a stake in their products. And they collaborate with their stakeholders on a daily basis to eventually build a product that delivers the highest value. So that's what stakeholder concern is about. Stakeholder concern does also require that the team should be responsive. Responsive meaning if a stakeholder has a new idea or if the team itself has a new idea for the product, they are responsive enough to release early and often. So they're responsive enough to do something with new insights. So stakeholder concern and responsiveness, those two are essential in order to have an effective team. And you can see below responsiveness that it's about release frequency and refinement. If you don't refine the items on your product backlog, probably work gets stuck in the sprint and you won't be able to release it early and often. Now, three other large topics that also needs to in place in order to make stakeholder concern and responsiveness work are management support, team autonomy, and continuous improvement. Team autonomy is essential for a team to make decisions, to not have dependencies on other departments or other things that are happening in the organization. They should be able to make decisions and self-organize or self-manage them in such a way that they can be responsive. If there are a lot of dependencies or you don't have any mandate at all, you can also not be responsive. Continuous improvement, meaning that a team is able to actually improve on the things that they consider important so that they don't get stuck in this cycle that I mentioned earlier of transparency, inspection, and ignore, but they can really do transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And finally, and that's also crucial, that's the sixth factor, that's management support. Because management plays a key role in creating an environment where all of this can happen. So management should actively work with the Scrum teams and the stakeholders to help them remove impediments that get in the way to make this work. And the question, I guess, was, so what's the role of a Scrum Master to make Scrum work? Well, the role of a Scrum Master is to set all of these topics over here in motion so that they can, so that they slowly start improving on all these areas and that team effectiveness is overall improving. And that's not easy. That's quite difficult. And that's also why Chris and I developed the Scrum Team Survey. And just to be clear, there's a free version of the Scrum Team Survey that you can use and that you can, well, already use with your teams to start improving on all these areas. Because what we've done with the Scrum Team Survey is that with your team, you can measure how you are doing on all these areas. You've got a questionnaire of about 60 questions, and they will give you an impression on how you are doing on all these topics. But let's see if I got a bigger picture. They will also give you insights on how you're doing as a team on each of these topics of the model. And if you have multiple teams, then you will also see all the teams visualized together. So in the blue bar on top, you'll see that, what is it, 4 or 5 teams in total in this example. You see the average. For example, responsiveness, what does it say? As a score of 65. But an average, well, that can be quite misleading. So therefore, you can also see how each team individually is doing. And in the middle part, you can see that I clicked continuous improvement, and then you can see the individual results of these 5 teams as well. Our intention is not to create a product to compare teams with each other, but to support teams to find help with other Scrum teams. For example, if a team scores low on continuous improvement and another team scores quite high, then this team has the opportunity to meet the other team and to ask them, hey, what have you done that you're scoring high on this level, and what can we learn from you? So it is a tool that we've built for Scrum teams to support them in their journey to become successful with Scrum. And probably improving on all these areas is something that can take years, especially because things are continuously changing as well. So Scrum is built on a framework that says transparency and inspection and adaptation is the essence. With the Scrum Team Survey, we've built a product that supports that flow. You create transparency about the state of Scrum in your team and of all those Scrum teams together. We offer a bunch of do-it-yourself workshops and actions and improvements that you can use to improve on the areas that matter the most to you. And you can add and work on these actions to actually make adaptations that are necessary. And afterwards, you can do another snapshot or take the survey again and see what improves. It's quite a long way to answer a seemingly simple question, but making Scrum work, well, that's kind of a big thing. And like I said, there's a free version that you can use with your team. There's also a paid version, and you can use that one to unlock cool features. I'll keep it over there. Did it answer? I'm not sure who asked the question, but is this a good answer for you? Does it work?
Yeah, it's a good one. Thank you.
So what's another question, or maybe Mark or JB, did you see a question that you would like to draw attention to? I'm just going through the chats to check the questions as well.
Looking.
As he's looking for questions, I have one real quick.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Team Champions, which basically is a combination of the product owner and Scrum Master for a Scrum team?
No, I haven't. I have heard before that someone combines the role of a Scrum Master and a product owner. Is that what the role is about?
Yes, it's a combination of one person doing the product owner's duties along with the Scrum Master duties. I have seen that in a couple of organizations, and it just is, to me, it promotes contention. There's some division then between the Scrum team and actually the stakeholders, because we don't get a good representation from a product owner's perspective and the Scrum Master perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I fulfilled that role for about 7 or 8 years, but that was the period where I called myself a project manager. And I have to say I wasn't highly successful, and there was a reason for that. And what I like the most about Scrum is that it makes a very clear distinction about these different accountabilities. And a Scrum Master and a product owner, in my own experience, what I always liked is the dynamic between the two of us. My focus was a bit more process oriented, was a bit more focused on team dynamics as well. And the focus of the product owner is, of course, more product orientated. It's not the only thing that you do, but I do like this dynamic between two people, product owner and Scrum Master, but also the developers. And I think what makes Scrum work is the dynamics between the three of them, developers, product owner, and Scrum Master. And of course, you can combine it, but it's combining a product owner and a Scrum Master responsibility doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because it could be that a product owner might be a bit more pushy, so to say, like let's see if the team can do more work. And a product owner is more a person that might be, well, protecting the team sometimes to say let's focus on them and let them decide how much work they can handle. If that's all combined in the same person, I think you get also for that person that is a team champion, I think it's just a very difficult role to fulfill for yourself.
Exactly.
So my short answer would be, don't do it. I just noticed that someone asked the question, how do you recover from Zombie Scrum? Tim, sure, if you're still in the call.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, we started our kind of our Agile journey back in 2011 with Scrum, and it was great at first, and it slowly we started seeing all the symptoms of Zombie Scrum as you described, to the point where they didn't want to do Scrum anymore, the team, but they couldn't go back to the old ways either, so we had to find something different. And we've kind of embraced mob programming as a way. We still we don't really keep all the ceremonies of Scrum, but we're using mobbing, with a driver and navigator technique and a Kanban board, and that seems to have rejuvenated the team. Now, that's been a couple of years now, so I imagine that might also roll. But there may be a trend that these teams, especially teams that have been together a long time, do you see kind of waning? And I'm just kind of curious from anyone here in the audience, how do you re-energize your team if they start to kind of slip into zombie mode? Yeah, I do, right? I think it's a very good question. I could do an easy answer and say, well, read the book. That's why we wrote the book. But also to give you just one answer is, I think a lot of Scrum teams focus way too much on Scrum. And I think that the reason why a lot of teams end up with Zombie Scrum is that they just focus so much on the Scrum theory. And I can't blame them, because whenever I check LinkedIn, I see another post or another article that's why Scrum teams should do this according to the Scrum Guide, why Scrum teams are doing it wrong if they don't do that part according to the Scrum Guide. And to me, that's always so easy to just point to the Scrum Guide and say that you are doing things wrong. But in short, Scrum should never be about Scrum. And whenever I work with other Scrum Masters, I always try to encourage Scrum Masters or anyone that works as part of a Scrum team, try to explain the things that you do as a team without using any Scrum term at all. So just try to explain the things that you are doing as a team without using any Scrum language. And if you try to do that, then you notice that you need to explain the purpose of the things that you are doing. And as a development team, when I work with a development team, and I really mean it, I always emphasize that I really don't care about Scrum. I do believe in empiricism. I do believe in if the work that you do is complex, then it's just a fact that you will do a lot of assumptions, and the best way to validate your assumptions is by delivering a done increment. putting a tangible product in the hands of your stakeholders. And Scrum is just a framework that happens to use an empirical approach. But extreme programming is using it as well. So if they prefer to use practices or principles of extreme programming, I'll definitely be the biggest supporter. If Kanban is the approach that works best for them, well, go for it. Kanban is also excellent. So for me, the better teams that I've been part of were not Scrum teams. They were teams that just experimented with the things that they considered useful for them to support them in product development. So I can only, and I think a lot of teams that end up with Zombie Scrum are teams that for various reasons stick to Scrum while they should not be sticking to Scrum. And maybe they should try other stuff, but it's more like they were part of this large Agile transformation, and their Agile transformation consisted of implementing Scrum, and that's why they ended up with Scrum. And for me, yeah, that's just, you're probably going to end up with Zombie Scrum anyhow. But then again, if you take a look at, so this draw attention to, you cannot really see it. Just gonna go to this one. To me, that's what team autonomy is about. The autonomy is also being able to make decisions about the tools and the process that you use. And if that means not use Scrum, then please use something else. And we do need to change the name of the Scrum Team Survey, because the Scrum Team Survey, it's not about Scrum. It's not focused on teams only, and it's not really a survey. So I'm not sure how we ended up with the name, but it evolved to something completely different. Did I answer your question, actually, Tim?
Yes, you did. Yeah, thank you. I mean, and I think that's exactly what we did, was we just experimented, tried something different.
Yeah.
And I think that is one way to get out of Zombie Scrum, is to be flexible enough to try new things. Thank you.
Exactly. So keep going. So what else? Did a new question emerge, or maybe you?
Hey, Barry, I've got
questions
one
yet?
that really piqued my interest.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
And I hope you don't mind me, but this question is from Vladimir's in, I think it's Mariah, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Maria.
Maria. Okay. Sorry, Maria. And they ask, is Scrum the same as communism?
So I do need some help to answer this question.
Okay, we can
Can you
give
maybe elaborate or give some background?
we can give a background. Sometimes people who get first introduction to values, but they don't feel that values are very deep in the way of working, but more like statements from management. They see it something that is pushed by management, and therefore they see it as another change, like they have experienced in Western Europe countries. Sometimes it was not coming from people, and therefore they see it, okay, some interesting values, some changes, but they don't feel part of it.
New posters on the walls.
New terms.
Yeah. I think for me it relates to, let's see, do I have a good illustration of that one? I think it's this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's also not, it's just a thought that emerges in my mind. I don't really like the change in the Scrum Guide. They changed servant leadership, so the Scrum Master as a servant leader, and now they made it the Scrum Master as a true leader. But I hope that I'm allowed to say it, but as true leader, when thinking of a true leader, I get completely different ideas in my mind. I need to think about North Korea and true leadership over there. And then it also relates to how Agile transformations are sometimes going in organizations. And I really don't believe in big bang agile transformations, because often if not even one team can use Scrum successfully, then then why would 20 or 40 or 100 teams would? So my preferred approach is always to start bottom up, see if there's an interest for some teams to experiment with Scrum, support them in using Scrum in a way that works for them. And I would say that you should not start removing things from the Scrum framework because it's too difficult. So they should make it work in a way that is aligned with the Scrum Guide. And I'll explain that one in a moment. But give them the autonomy and the freedom to self-manage themselves so that they think, hey, this is an approach that works for us and we can be successful with this approach. That can mean that teams have different ways of working. And of course, if they are working on the same product, they need to align with each other, because otherwise they might get into trouble of not being able to release a product together. But I think if you use such an approach, you might also prevent the communism connection.
Yeah, another element is religious elements in Scrum, and it's good that now it's not the ceremonies but events.
So we
Yeah.
don't sacrifice any goats.
Yeah, but still it scares a lot of people that there is some elements of religious.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
And this is a book.
Yeah.
Only what is written
I don't have
in
the
this book.
illustration in this presentation. That's a shame. But I also created a presentation where someone is standing on the mountain with a book in his hand and he's shouting, "Thou shall do Scrum." And I'm quite allergic to that as well. So Scrum is not the Bible. It can be a very powerful approach. But what I was also trying to explain is that, and it might feel like a contradiction, I do believe that the Scrum Guide makes a lot of sense, but that teams, especially in the beginning, should try to live up to the Scrum Guide, but not because something is written down in the Scrum Guide, and that's the reason why you should do it. But there are a lot of things in the Scrum Guide or in the Scrum framework that just make sense in general. And by that, and let's just use this poster. I'm just going to show the poster that we created about the Scrum framework.
But authors
And there it
took
is.
some ideas from the church, because they was true believers, and there was some elements.
Yeah. But I think that's not something you should focus on. But what's about to say is that parts of Scrum Guide that are just really good is the goal-focused development. Like without a product goal and without a sprint goal, you probably end up with Zombie Scrum. And not because that you're doing it wrong because you end up with Zombie Scrum, but without a goal, teams lack focus. Without focus, team morale will be damaged and harmed as well. Without a goal, chances are you probably will not be delivering value to your stakeholders, or you will not be able to adapt to insights that might emerge. So that's just one example of things that are part of the Scrum framework that make a lot of sense and that teams should use, but not because, well, it's stated in the Scrum Guide itself. But I think the whole connection with religion, etc., considering Scrum as the Bible, well, I would try to prevent that. I would say if that's happening in your community or in your organization, that I would go in a different direction. So we've got about, I would say, 5 minutes left, because then I can also use 5 minutes as some closing words. So what is a question that I haven't addressed yet, but you would like to bring attention to? Just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, it's Nutsa here. I
Hello.
wrote my question in the chat, so yeah, since no one unmute themselves, I will share it here. My main concern and question was about non-collaborative management, which itself caused a lot of problems. And I just listed some of the problems, like changes in the goals and cancelled sprint, demotivated team, not stable team, and therefore, dropped efficiency or productivity. So as a Scrum Master, it's really difficult to address the impediments that team might identify, and therefore work on removing those impediments when you face non-collaborative management. So yeah, I just would like to hear some advices or tips and tricks, or how can I handle this kind of situations. I also know that consistency and patience is the key, and small steps to, change the behavior, though it's really difficult to keep balance in the team while working on those baby steps, let's say so.
Yeah. Of course, it's difficult to answer the question because I don't know your managers, I don't know your organization in any context. In general, I would say it makes sense if you create awareness about the consequences that a team faces because of the impediments. And again, don't use any Scrum language, like because of these impediments, we can't use a sprint goal, because probably that manager doesn't really care about you using a sprint goal, but more try to explain it in ways like, because the fact that we don't have a sprint goal, we don't have any focus at all as a team, or this impediment is causing a lot of stress in my team. And maybe because of the stress, people are sick at home, might leave the team, might leave the organization. The product might be delayed, stuff like that. Things that matter to the manager, because I never really experienced management to resist. It might appear as resistance, but it might also just be a lack of knowledge. It might be fear, because sometimes when Agile is introduced in an organizations, things are mentioned like we don't need managers anymore. If someone worked decades in an organization to finally be in a management position, and that's what you get to hear, like we don't need you anymore, then of course you resist. So as a Scrum Master, or as a product owner, or as a developer, maybe the first step is to try to position yourself in the shoes of a manager and try to understand where the resistance is coming from. Because if you understand their position, you might also be more able to support them and remove the impediments together. Because like I said, often it's not really resistance. Maybe it's just the fear of the unknown that might lead to resistance, or just that they don't see the impact of certain impediments.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not easy, but that is your role as a Scrum Master. And I would say, but that's also what I emphasized in the model, management plays an essential role in making Scrum work in an organization. You need management to create an environment where Scrum can be successful. And yeah, like I said, in my experience, most managers are more than happy to help out if they understand what is expected from them.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you very much.
Cool. So we've got 5 minutes left. So there's just a couple of things that might be helpful. Let's see. We wrote a white paper. It's a free white paper that you can just download. It's Scrum, a framework to reduce risk and deliver value sooner. So that might be of interest. You can get a copy, if you like, of the Zombie Scrum Survival Guide. We can ship it to the US, but you can also order it from Amazon, and that will save you some shipping costs, just so you know. Already mentioned the Scrum Team survey, and if you like the free version, then you can also consider the subscription, take a subscription. And if you appreciate the work that Chris and I are doing, then just know that you are more than welcome to join our Patreon community. And then you can benefit from lots of stuff, but I'll leave it there.
Mark and or Jamie, anything that you want to mention or?
I just want to just thank you again, Barry, for joining us here. I know you've got your hands full with the Liberators and doing meetups there, and you don't necessarily do a lot of other meetups, but you very kindly agreed to join us here. And I thought this was fascinating and really like that you incorporated everybody's feedback and asked questions and allowed it to be more interactive. I thought it was really good. So I guess everybody can give a virtual round of applause to Barry for joining us.
I'd also like to just, as an extra plug for both being a patron of the Liberators and the Scrum Team Survey, I am involved in both, and I highly recommend. There's a lot of value, way more value. I don't think they're really getting paid for their time. It's way more time than the value you're getting out of this. And so I would highly recommend you offering your support if you're able to this great community and the Patreon community, because there's just the articles they're posting are often. So lots and lots of great stuff there, lots of value. Scrum Team Survey. I've done this with 3 teams in my organization. We've done it a first time to establish a baseline, and we had a workshop and we looked at our results, and we were actually making improvements based on that Scrum Team Survey. We were able to make visible some of the things that were invisible to us by taking the survey. It highlighted some things that would be a great starting point for things to improve. Obviously, Scrum is a continuous improvement opportunity, right? So that, I mean, there's always things to improve, but if you're asking the question, where do I start? That would be my recommendation, is to start with some of the suggestions from the Scrum Team Survey and then go from there with your teams. Highly recommend that.
Cool. Thanks,
So,
Jen.
Barry, thanks again
Appreciate
for
it.
being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, we can do the waving parts over here, and then maybe stop the recording, and then I'm fine with sticking around for another 10 minutes if there are any other questions.
All right. Well, once again, thanks, Barry. Barry did not ask us to do this, but I just have to say the Liberators book, Zombie Scrum, I highly recommend it as well. Half the book is very instructional, and the other talking about the symptoms of zombie scrum, and the other half is very practical, giving you some exercises and some ways to combat zombie scrum. So I highly recommend that as well. All right. Well, I guess with that, Jamie, we can stop the recording and call it a day. And if anybody wants to stick around, like Barry said, if he's willing to stick around for another 10 minutes or so,